let's wait for some people to jump on, and we can get started on another fascinating conversation on Brexit. We got more news
This
up.
we've got more news. This subject just goes on getting more and more complicated with more and more twists and turns. But let's take it through the latest developments today and yesterday. And I think there's a lot to explain because it's not been very well understood or reported, in my opinion.
Well, there's definitely a lot to explain, and
Yeah.
I'm also very confused as to what's going on
Yes. Yes.
because on the one hand, you read that the parliament has taken control of the Brexit process, but then you
Yes.
start to see that that's not the case.
No.
So,
No. It
so
doesn't work like
you'll
that.
walk us through it, I imagine,
Yes. No.
as to what's
Absolutely. I
going
mean,
on.
absolutely. I
All
mean,
right,
yeah.
all right. People are jumping on now, Alexander.
No.
So let's get moving.
Yes.
All right, welcome everybody to another live chat where we are going to talk about Brexit and some of the news in Brexit. Alexander, I'm going to read you a title from a Zero Hedge article that came out as to what was going on in the UK today, and you can comment on it. And comments, take this article along with the title that we've given this live chat and take it from there. The Zero Hedge title was Now That Parliament Has Seized Control of Brexit, Here's What Happens Next. Our title is Not So Fast. Parliament has not seized control of Brexit. Alexander, what's going on?
Yes, I think what has happened is a product of much confusion in the way in which the British Constitution works. A lot of people, I think, don't realise that there is actually a separation of powers in Britain, just as there is in the United States. Only because Britain doesn't have a written constitution, it's not as clear-cut in Britain as it is in the United States. But the important thing to understand is that in Britain, as in the United States, Parliament legislates and the government governs. It is the government that makes and executes policy. And what people, I think has happened when they are looking at the latest developments in Brexit is because a vote was passed in the British Parliament yesterday, which paved the way for what are called indicative votes. These are votes that will happen or are going to happen in the British Parliament, where the Parliament, the House of Commons, will vote on various options. I think people think that that means that one of those options, the one that gets the greatest support, be it, a second referendum or revoking Article 50, is somehow legally binding and that the government will have to carry it out. It doesn't actually work like that because these votes, these indicative votes, will not carry any legal weight. They will simply be consultative. And even if some attempt is then made by MPs in the House of Commons to take one of those votes and convert it into some kind of bill which has legal force, it is highly questionable, in fact not questionable, it is impossible that that can be binding on the British government because there is no mechanism under the British Constitution whereby the Parliament can force the government to do something which the government doesn't want. So Parliament can vote for a second referendum, Parliament can vote against no deal, Parliament can vote to revoke Article 50 and to keep Britain in the European Union. But if the British government says that it won't implement those votes become ineffective up to the moment when the government itself is overthrown. And so far, all attempts to overthrow this government and to remove this Prime Minister from office have failed. So what we're seeing in the British House of Commons and in Parliament is lots of theatre, but no real action. And I think this isn't something that is very well understood.
All right, people are joining the live stream. Thank you very much to everybody who is joining. Hi, Theresa from Dublin. Hey, Pat, how are you doing? All right, thank you guys for joining the live stream. Alexander, why are they going through this process then if this is all theater? And expand a little as to what you mean by overthrow the government.
Yes, yes. The way to change the government in Britain is to pass a vote of confidence in the House of Commons, where a majority of MPs say that they have no confidence in the government. Now, there was a major constitutional change in Britain about 9 years ago when a coalition between the Conservatives and the Liberals came to power, which said that there has to be a specific vote of confidence on a standalone vote. It can't be joined to any other issue. And at the moment, no such vote of confidence has been successfully carried until the government is voted out of office by a vote of confidence of the House of Commons. It remains the government. And as the government, it has the constitutional and legal right to carry forward its own policies. You can't force the British government to do something it doesn't want to do unless you change it. And that is the British constitutional principle.
All right, Alexander, here's a question from Pamela. As the UK has no constitution, it cannot really be said, therefore, to have a constitutional crisis, what laws precisely do govern what the PM and government can do, or are there none?
No, first of all, I mean, this is a very important point. Britain does have a constitution. The problem is that it's not written, and we don't have a single. We don't have a single.
That's a problem.
Exactly, it's a huge problem. But we don't have a single document, as they do in the United States, or in most countries now around the world, which sets out clearly what the various provisions of the Constitution are. But that doesn't mean that Britain doesn't have a constitution. Britain has a constitution which evolved organically over a period of about 1,000 years. And the principle of the Constitution, the underlying principle of the Constitution, is that a creature known as the Crown in Parliament, very confusing, is sovereign. Now, the Crown in Parliament consists of three parts. Firstly, the Queen and her ministers, then the House of Commons, then the House of Lords. It's those three things taken together are sovereign, and they cannot erase each other. You can't have a situation where one part of this constitutional structure, the House of Commons, in effect abolishes the other without the agreement of the other. All three have to agree. Now, this has all, as I said, been developed over around 1,000 years, but it is a constitution that exists and is active. It is set out in a vast multiplicity of different laws, some of which go back centuries. I mean, we had a question about a week ago, about a rule of procedure in the House of Commons, which goes back to 1604. So that gives you an idea of how old some of these provisions are. But it is a fundamental mistake to think that Britain doesn't have a constitution. It does have a constitution. It's not written. And that is, of course, the source of great confusion and great joy to the constitutional lawyers who make a huge amount of money interpreting it.
All right, but before we get to some of the options now that are on the table as we go forward with Brexit, whatever days are remaining until Brexit, comes to some sort of impasse. Andreas Yorio says, last time I looked, the House of Lords opposed Brexit. Is that true? Does the House of Lords oppose Brexit?
Yes, it does. The House of Lords.
So who's supporting Brexit? Who's opposing Brexit?
Right.
As far as these sovereigns go.
Okay, so the House of Lords opposes Brexit, but of course it is the weakest part of the constitutional system because there is a provision in the British Constitution called the 1911 Parliament Act, which says that if the House of Lords rejects a bill by the House of Commons, the House of Commons can follow a special procedure which can impose the bill on the House of Lords, which cannot reject it. So the House of Lords, though it exists and though it's an important part of the system, it's not the decisive part. Then there is the House of Commons, which I think it's fair to say is broadly opposed to Brexit, in that out of the 600 odd MPs, around 500 of them really hate Brexit. However, they have to be concerned with the fact that as it is an elected chamber, around two-thirds of the seats, around two-thirds of the constituencies that return MPs to the House of Commons voted heavily for Brexit. So though most MPs are opposed to Brexit, they can't come out openly and say they oppose Brexit, because if they do, they risk losing their seats in a next election. So the House of Commons is very ambiguous about this. And the third part of this system, of the constitutional system, which is the British government, led by Theresa May, in theory, it is committed to Brexit, but as we know, there are ministers within the British government who secretly oppose it, and the full-time civil servants are completely opposed to it. Now, there was a fascinating article in the London Times, which is, if you like, the closest thing we have here to a newspaper of record, though one shouldn't take that too seriously. But it was an article by a journalist called Rachel Sylvester, in which he said very clearly that not only does the civil service oppose Brexit and oppose the policy of the British government leading up to Brexit, but they are changing the minutes of cabinet discussions to make it more difficult for that to happen and to expose ministers to future investigation when a public inquiry is set up. So they are actively trying to sabotage Brexit. So you could see that we have this very complicated situation where the government nominally supports Brexit, the House of Commons nominally supports Brexit, the House of Lords opposes Brexit, but the House of Commons and the government, which in theory support Brexit, are actually by no means committed to it.
Yeah, the government, in other words, the government should be carrying out the mandate of the referendum. But in practicality, what they're doing is they're working to make that mandate, to thwart that mandate, to sabotage that mandate, correct?
It is. Some ministers are, not all of them. I mean, there are some people within
the core group of May's government, the core cabinet. How would you sum it up?
The core cabinet. I mean, the core cabinet, Theresa May herself, I think, is committed to this ghastly deal that she has negotiated. But then there is a group within the cabinet led by people like Amber Rudd, who are, frankly, I think, straightforwardly opposed to Brexit. And Philip Hammond, who is the Chancellor, the finance minister here, I think, frankly, he opposes Brexit too. I mean, he won't say so, but I think that's what he really feels. And they have been working to stop it. And they have generally had the upper hand within the cabinet. But outside the cabinet, there are the various MPs, Conservative MPs, who support the government and upon whose support the government relies. And the majority of the backbench MPs, the foot soldiers, if you like, of the Conservative Party in Parliament, they, I think, back Brexit.
All right, let me take you through the Zero Hedge article, Alexander, and some of the options that they're presenting going forward. And they mentioned that in light of the Letwin amendment passing,
yes,
and you can explain a little bit in detail what the Letwin amendment is. Mm-hmm. Zero Hedge is saying on Wednesday, the 27th of March, MPs will vote on a series of options to establish what could command a majority in Parliament The result of any such indicative votes would not be binding on the government as it goes against the Tory manifesto. There is no official list of options, although one has been generated by the Commons Select Committee for Exiting the EU. Explain a little what the Letwin Amendment is, and I will give you some of those options as to what could possibly happen in this Brexit saga.
Right, now can I make it absolutely clear? We've discussed John Bercow, who is the speaker, many times. I think a stronger speaker, a more impartial speaker, a speaker who was more concerned with the proper procedures of the House, would never have allowed the Letwin Amendment to be put forward, because it is clearly, again, to my mind, a gross violation of the standard procedure of the House of Commons, which puts the timetable of bills in the House of Commons under the control of the government. Without that control, it becomes very difficult for the government to carry out its duties. Now, what the Letwin Amendment says is that time is going to be allocated. Usually the people who allocate time for the decisions, for discussions of bills in the House of Commons are the government. But the Letwin Amendment says time is going to be allocated contrary to the government's wishes tomorrow, on Wednesday, so that the House of Commons can discuss and vote in these so-called indicative votes on various Brexit options. That's all it does. It's not actually doing anything else. It's not imposing a policy on the government. As I said, the House of Commons doesn't have the power to impose a policy on the government, but it is creating a space in the timetable for MPs to have their own discussion against the government's wishes. That is already a major infringement of the government's prerogatives. Bercow has allowed it to happen. The MPs have voted for it. But in my opinion, it's not going to end up achieving very much.
All right, guys, hit that like button, smash that like button, share the channel with everybody you know. Alexander, some of the options, let's go through them. Theresa May's deal with the EU. Is that an option? Is that a realistic option at this point?
Yes, it is an option. And I have to say, if you're going to talk about options, I think that is still a fairly strong option.
Even though it's been voted down twice and it would be voted down a third time?
Even though it's been voted down twice, and even though the Speaker of the House of Commons, Bercow, acting, as I said, for once, legally and constitutionally, has said that it's improper to bring it to the House of Commons a third time. Theresa May is committed to this ghastly deal that she's negotiated. She wants to bring it forward to the House of Commons next week to vote for it a third time. However, it looks a certainty now that it will be voted down, because the Democratic Unionist Party, the Northern Irish Party, upon which the Conservatives rely for a majority in the House of Commons, has said that they will vote against it. And given that the Democratic Unionists are going to vote against it, I expect the Brexiters, people like Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Davis, all the others, I think they're going to vote against it too. So it is going to go down to another defeat next week if Theresa May insists on putting it forward.
All right. Option number 2, which is the best option, in my opinion, a no-deal Brexit. The option that people voted for.
Yes, it is still a reality. Now, can I explain why? Obviously, Theresa May says she doesn't want it. Obviously, a big majority in the House of Commons say they don't want it. There is a majority in the Conservative Party, the Conservative Parliamentary Party, who I think would, in fact, be prepared to see it happen. And there is a very large group of MPs in the Conservative Party who would actively support it. it is still a possibility, a real possibility, because what we need to always understand in this negotiation, in this convoluted process, is that there are two parts to it. There are the British and there are the Europeans. Now, if the British next week, the Parliament votes down Theresa May's deal for a third time, and some new proposal is cooked together, and we'll talk about what those other proposals are in a moment. But if a new proposal is cooked together, and the British come along and propose it to the Europeans, and again, I have to add the caveat that the British who would have to propose it to the Europeans is not the House of Commons. It would have to be the British government. And the British government has already ruled out certain possibilities. We will discuss that too. But if the British come forward to the Europeans with some other proposal, if the Europeans reject it, and Macron, who is the president of France and the leader of the European integrationists, has made very clear that he is very strongly inclined to reject any further proposals, then a no-deal Brexit happens on the 12th of April.
So Macron's going to give the British people what they voted for.
Yeah, he might do. I mean, we've discussed this in a video we did some months ago. And the events of last week show that it's actually a real possibility. Not because, you know, he wants to help the British or he wants to help the British people. He doesn't give a fig for the British people. But he wants to, you know, stick one in the eye for the Germans, with whom he's got issues at the moment. He wants to punish the British because in his vanity he thinks that a no-deal Brexit is the worst possible outcome for the British. But on top of all of that, he wants to get shot of the British because he doesn't want Nigel Farage in the European Parliament.
Right.
And he doesn't want the British slowing down this move towards further integration within Europe that he is so committed to. Now, I'm not saying that Macron will prevail. I mean, you know, there are other people in the European Union who would want to keep the British in. But it is not impossible. In fact, you know, after some of the things he was saying last week, it is highly possible that he will veto any further extension, in which case Britain crashes out with a no deal.
God, how would Angela Merkel feel about that?
I'm very angry, I think. But a power is draining away from her and has been for several months now, ever since those regional elections that happened in Germany, in places like Bavaria and elsewhere, where it became very clear that German public opinion is turning against her.
All right, let's get into some more complicated options that are available. Eliminating a backstop. Is this an option from the withdrawal agreement?
Yeah, I think that there are some people who yearn and ache to do that, probably a majority in the House of Commons. At this moment in time, I don't think they would dare to do it.
Can you explain a little the backstop as well, Alexander? Because even I'm a little fuzzy on the backstop issue.
Right. Okay. The backstop is the deal, is the part of Theresa May's agreement, which says that Britain cannot leave a customs union with the EU without the EU agreeing. The reason that provision is there is in order to preserve a soft border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. That is for the British, for many, many British people, myself included, the key sticking point, because it means that Britain is locked into a customs union with the EU, which it can never by itself lead. Now, as I said, I think they ache to do that. I think they would love to vote it down. The problem is, as it's in an international agreement, they can't vote it down. So any vote to vote it down by the House of Commons is not going to have any legal effect because the European Union won't accept it. And the European Union has made absolutely clear that they will not retreat from the backstop. So, as I said, I don't personally think that option exists.
All right, this is an interesting option. I don't know much about it. It's the Canada-style deal, which is a popular idea with hardcore Brexiteers. This would focus on the future trade deal with the EU rather than the withdrawal agreement. In theory, the UK would accept no continuing regulatory alignment with the EU, although it is unclear how far the EU is willing to negotiate this.
Yeah, yes, it's a free trade agreement essentially. I mean, you can. I mean, let's not get muddled by all these, pompous words like, Canada Plus and all the rest of it. It's a free trade agreement, a perfectly good agreement, and one, by the way, which Britain could negotiate with the EU after a no-deal Brexit. Why not? I'm perfectly willing to accept that. I think it's a perfectly good agreement. The majority in the House of Commons oppose it, and Theresa May opposes it also.
Why?
Because
Theresa May, it sounds like something any sovereign nation would have the right to do.
Absolutely, because Theresa May doesn't just want Britain in a free trade have a free trade agreement with the EU. It wants Britain to have what she calls frictionless trade with the EU. Now that means being inside the EU customs union, and that incidentally also means accepting EU regulations on many British goods. That's what she committed to right at the beginning when she first became Prime Minister. It was, for me, the flashing amber light that not all was well with Theresa May and that this negotiation would probably fail. But that's what she wants. That is what the majority of people in the House of Commons want. I am afraid, because they are committed to it, because they don't want free trade with the EU, they want Britain to be in the EU in some form, either as a member of the EU or as a country inside the European Customs Union. I'm afraid there isn't a majority for it for the moment. But, it might happen especially if there is a no-deal Brexit.
All right, this one is one that a lot of people have been talking about. It's the Norway Plus deal. What do you make of that option, the Norway type of exit?
Yes. This is right. Okay, this is what the.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
Yes,
Norway deal. Yeah.
Well, I know. It's basically what Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party support. The idea here is Britain remains in the customs union. Britain remains in the single market. Can I explain the difference between the two? The customs union is the arrangement whereby the European Union goods move within the European Union freely, and the European Union negotiates with third countries customs trade deals. So if Britain is a member of the customs union, the European Customs Union, it cannot, by way of example, negotiate a separate trade deal with China or with the United States. The Europeans would have to do that for them. The single market is this body of regulatory law, which is called the ACWIS, the European regulatory law, which means that my dog is barking.
The dogs are out. There you go.
Yeah. There's a helicopter flying around, so they're getting very excited about it. But he'll die down in a minute. Right. The European single market is the system of European regulatory law which imposes uniformity of goods throughout the customs union. Now, Theresa May has constantly been trying to claim that while she wants to keep Britain in some kind of long-term customs arrangement with the EU, she wants to take it out of the single market. In reality, I don't think that can happen. And if we sign up to this deal that she wants to impose on us, I think sooner or later we're going to get a judgment of the European Court of Justice, which is going to say that Britain is also a member of the single market also, even though that is not what a deal says. But the deal does say that we are subject to decisions of the European Court of Justice on issues of European law. So that, I think, is what is going to happen. Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party want this deal, which is an arrangement very similar to the one that Norway already has. So it would remain part of the European Customs Union. It would remain part of the European single market. It would not be part of the European Union's political institutions. And critically, it would accept free movement. So people would still be able to come to Britain from anywhere within the European Union and settle and travel here and take up jobs here in the way that they do now. And of course, it would mean that Britain would be subject to the regulations of the European single market, which are decided in Brussels and would have no word in them. So Britain would become a rule taker, not a rule maker. Nonetheless, the Labour Party has decided to accept this proposal. And in some ways, I can see certain attractions because it keeps things, it preserves, if you like, a status quo. And I'm going to take a controversial position here and say that I think if Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party can negotiate such a deal, they can probably say to the Europeans, well, you know, if we have a deal like this, we don't really need the backstop, because as we're going to be fully a member of the customs union and the single market, there isn't a need for a backstop. And that would actually, in the long term, be a better arrangement than the one that Britain would have under Theresa May's deal, because it would mean that at some future time, a government, a British government, elected to take Britain out of the customs union and the single market could actually do so and would not need permission from the European Union to do it. Now, I think this idea of Norway Plus, you know, variants of it, is perhaps what the Remainers, what we might be heading towards if the government's position starts to crumble. I don't think it's a certainty yet, but I think it probably has majority support in the House of Commons. And if there is a general election and Labour is returned to power, I think it might happen. And I think if it was proposed to the Europeans, they would probably agree to it. So I think it is a plausible, outcome. I don't think it's a certain one. Okay, I'm going to say something. I'm going to say one rather interesting thing, which is that one country that does not want to see it happen, by the way, is Norway. Norway isn't very happy with the Norway solution. There are lots of people in Norway who think it's a bad outcome for them, and they don't want Britain to be part of a solution like that. So there we go.
All right, so before we get to the final option of a second referendum, to sum up the Norway Plus and the backstop, the difference is that the Norway Plus does not have the backstop in there, but essentially the UK remains a subject of the EU, and yes, the Norway Plus deal just basically says, whereas the Theresa May's deal is pretty much you're stuck forever.
Yes.
No matter what government comes along, yes, you can't get out unless the EU lets you leave. Exactly. The Norway Plus deal says you're in the EU effectively, but maybe in the future a government with some balls and some guts to actually follow the mandate of the people may be able to take the UK out of the EU somewhere down the line in the future. Is that the essential difference between the two?
That is the essential difference. But there is another point which is very important, which is that the one thing that Theresa May did negotiate is an end to free movement. So under Theresa May's deal, there wouldn't be free movement. there would continue to be under Norway Plus. But here again, I'm going to express my own doubt because, as I said, I personally think that Theresa May may think she has negotiated an end to free movement, but I have to say I think it's quite likely that some way down the line the European Court of Justice will say, well, we see what is said in this agreement, but the fact of the matter is, as a fundamental principle of European law, if you are in a customs union with the EU, you have free movement, and they will, the deal that Theresa May has negotiated with the EU makes Britain subject to decisions of the European Court of Justice on issues of European Union law. So it may be that this advantage that Theresa May thinks she's achieved by negotiating away free movement isn't quite as real as she believes.
All right, 1,508 people are watching us right now. Guys, thank you very much. Share the channel with everybody you know. Smash that like button. Alexander, I'm completely dismayed because it seems as if both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, in their own different ways, they want to keep the UK inside the EU. And even worse, they want the UK to be subservient to the EU. Maybe one has a different flavor as to how they want to do it. But that's the message that I'm getting. And if that's the message, then things are not looking too good.
Well, they're not looking at all good. I mean, we're in a disastrous situation because what we have in Britain is a situation where the majority of people in Britain, and let me repeat again, a point I have made again and again and again, a very large majority of the people of England, which is the heartland territory of the United Kingdom, they voted to leave the EU. It is as simple as that. They were asked in the referendum, do you want to be a member of the European Union or not? And they voted no, we do not. Nonetheless, a political class, not just Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, but the overwhelming majority of the political class, as I said, 500 out of 600 MPs, the entirety of the House of Lords, nearly the entire media, apart from the Daily Telegraph, and the entirety of the civil service do not really respect that decision. They have been endlessly plotting and scheming and looking.
Oh, they're pissing all over that decision.
Exactly.
Come on.
Absolutely.
They're jerking everyone's chain on this decision for 2 years.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I mean, that is why we are in a constitutional crisis, because Theresa May, as I said, has gone off and negotiated a terrible deal, which is a deal that, as I said, locks Britain in a way that is inferior to outright union membership. Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, proposed something which in some ways is a little better and in some ways a little worse, but is still going to leave Britain locked into the economic arrangements of the EU without having any control over them. And as I said, the entire political class runs around saying, the worst possible outcome is a no-deal Brexit, which means Britain trading with the EU on World Trade Organization terms, even though that is the only philosophical position, the only position which is philosophically consistent with what the British people in the referendum voted for. I mean, that is why Britain is in crisis. And it is a crisis that is deepening by the day. One of the reasons why I want a no-deal Brexit is because it is the only way out of this crisis. If we do not get a no-deal Brexit on the 12th of April, that crisis is going to get worse, as tens of millions of people outside London are going to feel very betrayed by whatever outcome the political class in Westminster is imposing on them.
All right, let's get into then the second referendum. I saw a lot of people in the chat talking about it. That is the final option. Is it a possible option, Alexander? How possible is it? And also, if you had to take a guess, if it did come to a second referendum, what do you think the results of that referendum would be?
Right. Right. First of all, it's not the final on the list of options. Let's just.
There's more. Okay.
There's one more.
There's one more.
And it's revoking Article 50. But let's just leave.
Let's go second referendum and get to Article 50 then. Yeah.
Now let me be very clear about this. People who talk about a second referendum are talking nonsense. What they are discussing is not a second referendum. They want a rerun of the referendum which happened in 2016, but rigged this time to produce a different outcome. That is what they are really, honestly talking about. Now, there are a lot of people in the Parliament who would like to see that happen. I think that it will not happen. I still think it will not happen for two reasons, which is that the Conservative government understands that if some form of Brexit doesn't happen, even if it is a false and bogus Brexit, that will create a major crisis for the Conservative Party, because there are many, many people in the Conservative Party, a big majority of the Conservative Party's membership and a big majority of the Conservative Party's electoral base, who will be furious if there is this so-called second referendum, which is set up in order to cancel the first. So I think that for that reason, a majority of the Conservative Party won't agree to it. And I think a majority of the Labour Party MPs will not agree to it either, because they represent constituencies where most people voted leave. So I don't think it will come. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a head of steam building up behind it. I think that in the end, they will look for some solution like Norway Plus, rather than go down that route.
All right, Article 50 then.
Right. Now, I think that, okay. Now, Article 50, revoking Article 50 is to say, right, we are the Parliament of Britain. We will simply cancel Brexit entirely. We are going to vote against Brexit. We will change the law. We will repeal the Act of Parliament that said that, you know, Britain is going to leave the European Union.
Vote never happened. The vote never happened. And in some ways, let's be quite frank about this, it's a more honest position than, as I said, essentially rerunning the 2016 referendum and pretending that it's a second referendum. I don't think that they will do that, because I think that would be just too flagrant a rejection of the result of the 2016 referendum, and too clear a denial of democracy under the result of a democratic vote to do it. But be very clear about it. There are plenty of people in the political establishment who want it to happen. I read articles in the British media by certain uber Remainer journalists who have called for it. And there is one scenario in which I could conceivably see it. And that is if we get into a situation in the run-up to the 12th of April where it is clear that no deal, that no proposal put forward, cobbled together by the British, is going to get past Macron, and that the only way to stop a no-deal Brexit is to revoke Article 50. I think at that point we could start to see
various people in the House of Commons coming together and saying, let's revoke Article 50, let's get out of this situation where we are looking at this supposed disaster of a no-deal Brexit, a disaster which, in my opinion, is no kind of disaster at all. As I said, on the contrary, it is the optimal outcome now. But that's what they would say. Let us revoke Article 50. Let's avoid a no-deal Brexit, and then, of course, we can start this whole process again and revoke invoke Article 50 again at some future time. Of course, we all know that if Article 50 is revoked, it will never be revoked, at least not invoked again, at least not by this political class which we have in Parliament now. But, I don't think it's going to happen, but it is a real possibility. It is a possibility that I can see happening in a certain set of circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, because if Merkel sees that Macron is about to one-up her, then Merkel just might say, and she has nothing to lose anymore because she's on her way out anyway, she just might say, look, Theresa, here's the deal. You're going to revoke Article 50. I don't give a shit. You're going to revoke it. And you're right, Alexander. You said it perfectly. In essence, at least it's honest.
Yes.
Because it is pretty much the MPs and Theresa May saying, you know what? Everyone that voted, your vote doesn't really matter anyway.
Yes. Yes.
We're going to do whatever the hell we want anyway. Sorry for jerking you guys around for 2 years. At the end of the day, whatever the elite want, we're going to do. Our leader Merkel is telling us to do this as well.
Yes.
So the vote never happened. Then let's look at it sometime in the future. So I think you hit it spot on. You could say that this could be Merkel's, way to stop Macron from getting what he wants.
Exactly. So as I said, I don't think it's going to happen, but I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's possible.
Right. Right. All right. Great. Alexander, you ran through everything. That was awesome. Let's get to some super chats.
Indeed.
All right. Calibin, $4.99 super chat. Thank you very much for your super chat. Valley S, love you, Duran. You're amazing. Thank you, Valley, for your super chat as well. From MAGA 2020, can you speak to military union with the EU involving the UK, even if we leave? It appears that backroom deals are in place. That is a great question. Macron has been one of the biggest supporters of the EU army. He's pushed for it. What happens to the UK and their military involvement with the EU? And stretch it to NATO as well.
Yeah, right. The public position of the British government is that it opposes a European army because it fears that if there is a European army, it will supposedly weaken NATO. So that's the public position of the British government. As we have seen with this whole Brexit debacle, what the British government says and what it does are actually completely different things. And the reality is that the British military and the French military, which are the two strongest militaries in the EU, have been working ever more closely together all the time and are in fact now increasingly sharing certain military platforms. So, that is, I'm sorry to say it, something which, as the questioner says, is actually happening. And I predict, Brexit or no Brexit, it will continue, provided so long as we are led by the political class which we have.
Alexander, I may have jumped a little bit with the Merkel when we were talking about Merkel. Can you explain a little some of the talk and the chatter, how Merkel is really influencing May on her decisions?
Yes.
Merkel is not hands-off. As far as it comes to Brexit, Merkel has not been hands-off. She may not be making public statements and speeches about it, but she's very much a presence as to what's going on with Brexit, as is Juncker and Tusk and all these guys.
Yes, let's be absolutely clear about this. The major person that Theresa May has been negotiating with right the way through is Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel is the real leader. She is the actual leader of the EU. She is being challenged for that position by Macron and the French, who want to pursue under Macron, not all the French, but the people who support Macron, they want to achieve a much more integrated EU with stronger bureaucratic structures in Brussels, which will reduce, as they hope, German influence. But as the situation exists now, it is Merkel who makes the decisions. And Jean-Claude Juncker, in particular, is very close to the Germans. He is a very close friend of Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who is the German president. And in practice, he does whatever the Germans tell him. Donald Tusk, who is the Polish president of the European Council, is the same. So
they're aligned with Merkel more.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So what has actually been happening is that, yes, there are the formal negotiations which have been taking place between the various British Brexit secretaries. There have been many of them who are members of the British cabinet, and Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier, who is the EU's negotiator. But Juncker and Barnier take their orders from Merkel, and Theresa May comes and speaks directly to Merkel. And there have been many meetings between the two of them, and it is widely known that this deal that Theresa May has was hammered out between her and Merkel together. I mean, it is their deal. Merkel owns it as much as Theresa May does, except, of course, that Merkel is a formidable negotiator. Theresa May is a dreadful one. And this deal, which we have, Merkel owns, suits Germany very well, because, of course, Britain is a major customer for German goods, and will continue to be so long as it remains part of the customs union. So German industry does very, very well out of this deal. And it is a deal which, if it is ever ratified by the British Parliament, Britain cannot unilaterally leave.
Finally, before we close out this live, Alexander, what about Tony Blair? Do you think Tony Blair is in the shadows somewhere?
He's not. I mean, he's not in the shadows. He's actually, he's not there all the, publicly there all the time. But I mean, he's made no secret of the fact that he's been going around to Europe. And
does he have power? Does he have power?
No, he is. Well, he does. He has a certain influence, because there's around 40 to 50 Labour MPs, and now several of these MPs in this so-called independent group that have been set up. I mean, one of the members of the independent group, I forget her name, but she's a lady MP, and she at one time she was dating Tony Blair's son. So I mean, there's those kind of connections, but Tony Blair has considerable influence within the Labour Party, and in the media, and with his independent group of MPs. And what he's been doing is, of course, he's been to some extent orchestrating the opposition to no deal Brexit, because he's a committed globalist and European. And of course, more to the point, and perhaps rather more extraordinarily, he has been going to the Europeans and telling them to stand firm, because he expects that the whole Brexit thing will fail and the British will come to heel. And I think he has played an extraordinary double game, going against the wishes of the British people as expressed in the 2016 referendum, which he has never respected.
God, the world just cannot get rid of these war criminals, can they? I mean, we just can't wash our hands of these guys. The Blairs, the Clintons, all these guys. We just can't do it.
No, no, we can't, because one of the fundamental problems that we've had up to now is that it's become increasingly clear that we have more and more people are unhappy with this political class, and then more and more people are willing to vote against them. But up to now, there is no organized opposition to them. So we get odd people, from place to place who rise up. Donald Trump in the United States was voted in the United States by running against, the globalist elite.
Someone
Nigel
like
Farage,
Julian Assange.
Julian Assange.
That, yeah.
Well, Nigel
Tommy
Farage.
Robinson, Nigel Farage, yeah.
Nigel Farage. I mean, even Jeremy Corbyn in some ways. But they are not an organized force. So because they're not an organized force, they're not able to capture the institutions, and without control of the institutions, you never achieve anything.
Is that why they're coming down so hard on Tommy? Sorry to cut you off, Alexander. I don't usually, but is that why they're coming down so hard on Tommy Robinson? Whether you agree with him or not, Tommy Robinson does have a certain talent, a penchant for organizing people, for getting large groups to come out for him. Do you think that scares the hell out of the elites, what they see?
Yes, because we can see, not just with him, but with lots of other people. I mean, they are becoming increasingly authoritarian as they crack down on dissident voices. So, Hungary, which has dared to vote a government led by Viktor Orban, which doesn't agree with them, is now being booted out of the European People's Party, which is the dominant party in the European Parliament, which is controlled by Angela Merkel, and it's basically, again, whom it takes its orders from. We see, as I said, growing censorship in the internet and elsewhere. We've seen the Russiagate nightmare in the United States. All of this is part of a continuum, and that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a conspiracy fact. I mean, you only have to follow what's been going on over the last few years to see this. Now, some of these dissident voices I don't agree with, others I do. But I come back to the point I have always made, which is the censorship and the crushing of dissent in this way. And we see armed troops now on the streets of Paris. This kind of thing is completely wrong. It is totally contrary to democracy and free speech and the whole tradition of democracy in the West, which we should all defend, because without it, these people will completely take over.
And then you have leaders like Salvini in Italy who decided to just, go east, go their own way.
Well, indeed.
Go with China.
Well, indeed. I mean, we can. This is something we can talk about.
This may need a whole other live chat.
Live chat, exactly. But as I said, of course, no question about this. There are, as I said, there is increasing dissent and dissatisfaction across the European Union. The 2016 referendum in Britain is a big expression of that. But we see an elite that continues to control the institutions and which remains immovable and will continue to be immovable unless people organize against it. And when I say organize against it, I'm not calling for violent revolution. I'm talking for a proper return to real democratic politics.
Well put. We will leave it at that, Alexander. That was a good way to close out the live chat. We've been going for about 58 minutes, 1,781 people watching this right now. That's awesome. Thank you, everybody who joined us on this chat, who joined us for this update on what's going on in Brexit. Alexander, what's happening this week outside of the vote on Wednesday, I believe. Is that correct?
What with Brexit? The big question is, the other big thing that's going to happen.
What are we looking for next?
Yes.
In the short term?
The next immediate event is that Theresa May is due to meet with the parliamentary party, the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and there's growing speculation, which I don't take very seriously, but we will see, that she's going to announce a departure date for herself as Prime Minister in a last desperate throw to get a deal through. Now, that's speculation. I don't personally believe it, but we will see. whatever happens, I expect that's going to be a fiery meeting. And I'm going to say something, it may be a more important meeting in the end than all this business of indicative votes that we've been discussing about in this program today. Because, as I said, if there is a crisis of leadership in the Conservative Party, which there is, then, as I said, if the Conservative Party gets round finally to doing something about it, we might start to see some way out of this mess. But we're not there yet. And, we've seen these things talked about, and it might not come to pass. But it's important that we clear up the confusion that's been created over these so-called indicative votes, right, and over all these headlines about Parliament taking control. Obviously, we have this promise to our viewers that we will keep you fully informed of all developments as they happen.
Now, you cleared it up great, Alexander. You did a great job. Very quickly, what happened? What's going on with Boris Johnson? I haven't heard of anything about him. No. Is he playing any kind of role in this?
He is absolutely. He met with Theresa May on Friday and asked her to go, and she refused. Okay. And then he met her again at this extraordinary meeting in Chequers. Chequers is the British Prime Minister's country residence. It's a beautiful Jacobean country house built at the time of Shakespeare, very elegant. And he met her there at the head of the whole delegation of Brexiters. And apparently he and Jacob Rees-Mogg acted as the informal leaders of this group. And Theresa May again asked them to back their plan, and they again refused. Okay. So he is there, and he's written.
It doesn't seem like he's taking so much of a lead position, at least in the public sphere.
Not in
the media. In the media space, say.
Well, he did write a rather fiery and perhaps rather overwrought article for the Daily Telegraph the other day, in which he talked about Moses leading us out of the telling Pharaoh, right, let my people go.
Let my people go.
Which is rather like Boris. But I have to say, I think the reason he's keeping a rather low profile at the moment is because I think his priority actually is to try to engineer Theresa May's removal so that he can step in and become Prime Minister. And I think that he probably calculates that if he gives himself too much attention, then that might undermine that project. So he's there. He's not out. He shouldn't be counted out. But I have to say, if people are hoping that Boris is going to be the person to save Brexit, I frankly don't credit him with those abilities, and I don't think most people who have followed him closely do either.
Well, the way to save Brexit is, as you put it, Alexander, just listen to the people. Just do as they voted.
Yes, absolutely. And to organise.
Yeah.
And to organise for it. That hasn't happened. That hasn't happened up to now. And the party that should have done it, which was UKIP, essentially self-destructed after Nigel Farage made the greatest mistake of his political life when he resigned from the leadership of UKIP after the 2016 referendum.
Yeah, because Nigel Farage was the leader of the exit movement. He was the face of it, at least.
Absolutely. And if he'd been there leading UKIP, and UKIP was still putting pressure on MPs in constituencies up and down Britain, and so that they were really frightened of, if we don't vote for Brexit, Nigel Farage will come sweeping in, we would possibly not be in this mess. Yeah. By in effect, demobilising himself, he allowed the elite in London to take back control. So, the whole slogan of the referendum was take back control. But the people who took back control were not the British people. It was the elite and the European Union and people like Macron.
Yeah, Farage, he knocked them down, but he didn't knock them out.
Exactly.
That was the problem. He knocked him down, but he didn't knock him. He didn't go for the kill shot.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. And that was his biggest mistake. And I think he bitterly regrets it now. I think he's probably very tired, and perhaps he had personal reasons for doing it. But there is no doubt at all, it was a gigantic political mistake.
Yeah, it was his life's work, though. It was his
Exactly.
life's work.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, Alexander McCurse, thank you very, very much. Thank you, everybody, for hitting that like button. Thank you for sharing the channel. Thank you for listening to us. We really appreciate it. As Alexander said, we will keep you guys up to date as to what's going on in Brexit and all the news that's happening. We have a couple of videos dropping tomorrow. I think we have one on Italy and China, Alexander. That's a great video. We have that. And we have one that we just did recently on Venezuela as well. What's going on there? A lot of action all over the world. Yeah. Jeez. Everything's burning. It's all burning down.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. Never a dull day.
We're all going to be fine, everybody. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.
Take care.